Hello, just before we get going with this week's podcast, I want to give a special shout out to our brand new subscribers on patreon.com. They're the people who joined us very recently. If you go along to patreon.com/SPF Podcast, you'll see there's an opportunity to support the podcast and our work. And we have a special announcement this week, which is that every gold level subscriber, which is just $3 per podcast, is going to receive an SPF mug. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, we will send you an SPF mug. They are exclusive, money can't buy these. So that's an opportunity for you. And if you're currently bronze or silver and you move up to gold, you'll get a mug sent to you as well. That's patreon.com/SPF Podcast. A very quick thank you to those who've joined this week. That's Amanda Valentine, Anil Karamanchandani, David Danforth, James Duffy, also known as Xavier James, your pen name, and Olga Siegel. They're the ones for this week. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who subscribes on patreon.com. A lot of work goes into the podcast. In fact, I've just finished recording an interview for many weeks, hence all about how to raise funds. In fact, with this lady here, if you're watching on YouTube, all about how to raise funds to make the break from the 9 to 5. So that'll be a good episode in the future. And here I am talking to you from my swanky new office very late at night in the UK because I'm about to edit the podcast for this week. So yeah, a lot of work does go into it, and we certainly really appreciate those of you who dip into your pocket a little bit just to support us. And yes, by the way, that is a Vulcan bomber behind me. Right, let's get on with this week's podcast.
Two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast with James Blatch and Mark Dawson. We're speaking to you live this week. Sort of pretend live from a new venue, aren't we, Mark? In fact, it's an exciting new venue because we can't actually see each other.
No, which is a benefit. And you've made me get on a train this morning, travel halfway across the country to come to an unfinished shed in Huntingdon.
We'll take some pictures of the unfinished shed if you want to watch this on the YouTube channel. It is unfinished. The electricians literally plugged in the power source this morning, and the floor's not here, so I can't properly move in, but we've moved a load of stuff in. Sounds a little bit echoey. We've moved a lot of soft furnishings into the room to hopefully help with the echo. But it's we like to move around, don't we? We've recorded podcasts around the world, in the United States, at the London Book Fair, in Salisbury, a town in Wiltshire in the United Kingdom. And here we are finally in the home of Broadcast Britain, Huntingdonshire.
Yes, I feel like we've finally arrived.
We have.
Well, I arrived anyway. There's an insect up there, James.
Is there?
Well, in my big new insect office? In your new office. So yes, carry on.
Yes. The reason we can't see each other is because of the to dampen the sound. I've done what they used to do on the old pirate radio stations in the 60s when they were on boats off the shore of the UK. They used to hang up duvets and curtains and things. So I've put a load of soft furnishings on the table piled up. It's still a bit echoey, but anyway, it's the point is that we can talk to each other. We love doing our podcast, and we have a super interview today from a highly successful brand new author. Now, you might remember a little while back we spoke to Chloe Esposito just ahead of the launch of her book in the UK. And she's actually planning a trilogy, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know. And her book really stemmed from her participation in the Faber Academy, which is a highly sought after, difficult slot to land in the UK, an academy where it's effectively an evening class where you're taught how to write a book and you encourage each other. Well, somebody sitting next to her in that class was Felicia Yap. And when it got towards the end of the academy, Felicia really found herself in a very happy position of not just having an agent, a literary agent prepared to tout her book around, but she actually ended up in a bidding war. That was won by Headline. You might remember, if you cast your mind back, Mark, do you remember we had Alex Clark on here?
I do remember, yes. Alex is lovely, and Felicia was his first acquisition.
His first acquisition, so Headline, and Alex talked to us in that interview. So it's a new imprint. It's within, I was going to say Hodder. It's not Hodder. It's what are they?
I can't remember either.
It's an imprint within a lot. But anyway, the point is, Headline is a brand in its own right. So you don't know who you don't need to know who Grandparents is. And Alex said the girl on the train, they were looking for that type of book for the next book that people would all be reading on the train. And they'll do some other stuff as well, some non-fiction even. And I spoke to one of their non-fiction authors on the evening, and we'll try and get him on the podcast in the future. Very funny man. I say on the evening because I actually went to the launch party for Felicia's book, which is called Yesterday, which was just after we recorded this interview, but it was a really beautiful evening. In fact, I'll drop in some pictures again onto the YouTube version of the podcast so you can see the view we had of London. The headline building is amazing on the banks of the River Thames. And I didn't get to speak to Felicia. I don't know if you've been to these posh launch parties before, Mark, but it's like the bride or the groom. There's a queue to speak to them.
That's my life, James.
It's your life. People queue to speak to Mark Dawson. I've seen queues to speak to Mark Dawson. They had to exist, don't they?
They do sometimes.
But I joined the queue twice in the evening. On both times, I got distracted by people coming up who recognised me, and we chatted. And I have to say, did enjoy a few drinks on that evening with Alex Clark and a couple of other guys, and it was a very, very enjoyable time. But Felicia has really is the belle of the ball headline at the moment, and she has landed this deal for one simple reason, that she has written a brilliant book. I'm not going to give too much away about it. We do talk about the book and the themes behind the book and how she came to write it in the interview. She's got a very interesting background, Felicia. This is an extra treat. I keep mentioning the YouTube. I like to, because I think visually as well as in audio terms. And the extra spice for this is that I brought my camera down and we sat in Hyde Park on a gloriously hot day in London, or Kensington Gardens, in fact, I think, in London. And so I put the camera on Felicia, and it was almost like a TV interview, sat on the grass, where the odd stray dog did appear in the background. But we had a lovely chat about the book and her journey to this point. So let's hear from Felicia first, and we'll have a chat off the back.
I'm Felicia Yap. I'm the author of the thriller Yesterday. It's a debut novel, and it's coming out in August. The book is about a murder that takes place in a world where people only remember yesterday. So how do you solve a murder when you have limited memory? And how do you love someone if everyone who's involved have limited memory? That's what the book's about.
Okay, well, we should say, just to set the scene, especially if you're watching on YouTube, that we're sitting in Kensington Gardens, beautiful London on a summer's day. We've got a fairly large animal that's just appeared next to us, but I don't think it's going to disturb us. And this is quite literary in a way, isn't it? Because Kensington Gardens, I think, is where J.M. Barrie played with the children, and Peter and Wendy wrote Peter Pan, and lots of other.
There's a statue of him here.
There's a statue of him here. There you go. So here we are, and I mention it because he was a literary sensation, and you are on the edge, potentially this summer, of being a literary sensation. How weird does that sound?
Yes, it does sound rather odd. Not so sure about it being a sensation, but we all try our best, to do what we can, especially when you're writing your first book. You really want to give it the best you can, and this is what I certainly did.
Okay, well, let's talk about the book a bit, and then we'll talk about the journey, the publishing journey. I know you've had some thoughts on that and some advice for others, which is great for the podcast. So in terms of the book, let me tell you what I think. Obviously, we've got to be careful on spoilers, so I really want people to read this book. It's fascinating and very enjoyable. And it starts off, to me, it reminded me of reading, at the beginning, Isaac Asimov when I was a kid, because he came up with these ideas. I remember one of his short stories where the world resets at the end of every day and everyone's body never changes. And this young boy became obsessed with owning something nobody had owned before, because there wasn't such a thing. So it was an interesting set of themes, and your book starts with that. So we should just again set the scene that there are monos and duos, so people who can remember yesterday and the people who remember 2 days back. But by the end of it, do you know what? It was a whodunit, right? So buried in this fascinating context is a whodunit, which is just enjoyable.
Exactly. So really, it's a high concept thriller, I would say, with a whole range of different elements. So we have psychological elements in the story, also some philosophical elements to it. But I think what gives the story some narrative drive is the murder mystery underpinning this whole story. And really, it's about a dead woman's body being found in the River Cam. So suspicion falls on the man she had been sleeping with and his wife. So it goes back to the same question of how do you solve a murder or catch a killer when all who are involved, including the detective who's investigating the case, how do you solve this problem when you only remember yesterday or 2 days before
And a lot of the book is from the perspective of the main characters as we go through. And what I also enjoyed about the beginning of it, because I was sitting there thinking, how much are you going to gloss over the difficulties of living in this world just to make kind of the rather unusual scene you'd set make it work? But actually you get to understand how people have to adapt to this situation. So making notes, there's certain residual memories that they have, like who they are and their childhood up to a certain age. But the idea that everyone made a diary. I mean, everyone would. In those circumstances, everyone would write a diary every day because they'd have to.
Exactly. So people in this world are all dependent on technology, chiefly their electronic diaries, to understand their past. But that's interesting because when you're reliant on technology to know who you are, that opens up a whole new possibility for self-delusion. Really, what people choose to remember or forget because they have to write this down at the end of each day. That I think is, intimately linked with some deeper fears. And one of these is the fear of forgetting. And really this book is intended to hold a mirror to ourselves, to what we ourselves choose to remember or forget. So people in this world, they must make a conscious decision as to what they choose to remember of each day. So what goes into each diary entry is really a reflection of what we are afraid to forget, really, in their world and also in ours.
And I'm going to talk to you about where the idea developed from, how you started with it. But do you think is there something about the way we are living through technology today, social media, the millennials live their lives, and my daughter's 13 is very much in the mix of that, and how their life plays out on social media might be quite different from how they feel, but there's a blurring and emerging, and she must wonder at some point, as that generation do, which one's the real one.
Oh, absolutely. I actually attended an exhibition last week on diaries and how diaries have mutated basically from, papyrus scrolls to smartphones these days. And I'm really conscious that all of us, have this slight disconnect between the public selves, which we choose to present on social media or in the public domain on Facebook, Twitter, and also our personal selves. And often the two are quite different. So I do believe that yesterday my book taps on some of these differences in terms of what we wish to portray to the outer world and what we actually perceive ourselves to be.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. It is a fascinating world, isn't it? And I think, a lot of us, subconsciously or not, fall into presenting ourselves in a way that's flattering to us. Everything's blue sky and fun, and you tend to post things that are happy in your lives, although actually not everyone does. I think we've all got friends who only ever seem to post their moans. Oh, another bad day for me. And they might be completely lovely people in real life, but their persona online is very different. So this is a really interesting area that I don't think any of us really have got to grips with yet.
Oh, absolutely. And that opens the question of whether or not immediacy, which is really the nature of the social media beast, you post as soon as you feel something or experience something. Is it the same with authenticity? Does it reflect our true selves? So that's the question. I think yesterday, let's go back to that.
So Felicia, where did this come from? Where did this idea start?
The idea came to me on my way to a ballroom dance studio in Cambridge because my partner and I, my fiance and I, used to compete on the dance sport team. So we got into the car and began driving to the studio, and suddenly this question popped in my head: how do you solve a murder if you have one day's worth of memory? And the possibilities which were inherent to the speculative world, they so intrigued me. I got to the dance studio, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so with my partner's help, we worked out the early contours of the story on the dance floor before we left the studio, between our tango twists and turns. So you could say that twists and turns were built into the fabric of this thriller right from the start.
I love that. I love the fact that we keep getting approached by dogs as well, but they're being dragged off by their owners. Do you know what? It's one of the things I know from living in and around Cambridge, that ballroom dancing, you can get a blue for ballroom dancing. Do you have a blue for ballroom dancing? I represented Cambridge.
It is not a blue, I'm afraid. It's a half blue.
It's a half blue, that's right, yeah, okay. For people to understand it, it's taken quite seriously. There was a brilliant documentary a few years ago about this whole area.
Well, actually, it's since been upgraded to a full blue since my time at Cambridge.
Oh no,
so
you've
being taken seriously as a
You've
sport.
had to slum it with a half blue, and other people get a full blue. Okay, so I love the idea of the twists and turns and the relationship between a narrative structure and dancing. That's a new one on me, but it makes sense when you talk about it.
Well, I firmly believe that inspiration comes on the move. It doesn't matter where you're moving. It could be between a city and a second one, or it could be on a dance floor. I think changes of environment really do spark ideas. And in my case, I do a lot of writing on trains, on buses, on planes, because that's where, I begin to see new things, because it's just this exposure to different environments and, sort of different settings that really triggers something in my head quite often.
So we'll come on to the publishing journey in a second, but people always like to know, writers like to know how you write, and you just mentioned that you can write all over the place. Do you have a set routine for writing? I mean, obviously this is your first book. Are you now in the midst of your second book, or?
I'm indeed writing the prequel to Yesterday. The working title for that is Today. And I do try to write everywhere I can, every single minute I can carve out of a journey, or simply at my writing desk. And really, there's no set plan. Different days work differently for me, and also different places work differently for me. So say if I'm traveling in Germany, I find myself being very, very organized and very structured.
So you tune into the environment.
Exactly. I wouldn't have a plan, hooray. But in places like Italy, I tend to go more with the flow. Yeah. So it all depends on where I'm writing and when exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and letting that soak up and hopefully, presumably, come through to your novel. So if you wrote the whole novel in Italy, it would be a different tone and a different feel from the one you wrote in Germany.
I suspect so, indeed. I want to find out exactly how though.
And in terms of plotting and planning, have you plotted out the second novel, or are you writing it as a pantser, as they say, on the go?
I'm writing it organically. There are plotting days and there are also, free-flowing days. But I'm quite far along with the first draft, so it's hopefully a good position to be in, because I'm on the precipice of the first one actually coming out. So, yeah, and that's taking up quite a lot of time. So having the first draft down of the next book, I think, is what I'm aiming to, sort of get to.
Yeah, so we should say we are just a few weeks away from publication as we record this. The interview will probably go out just after publication, and you're going to start in the States. I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel a bit nervous? There's a lot, I'm not going to say a lot riding on that would be an unfair thing to say, but a lot of people love the book. I know your publisher's very excited about it, but inside we all have doubts, don't we? So where do you feel now?
Of course, it's a whole mixture of incredulity. It's like, is this really happening to me? But at the same time, a huge excitement, when you're on the verge of something you've always hoped for, and you can see it's sort of like looming on the horizon. That's really exciting. But also, of course, great amount of nervousness, because you never know how people will respond to your book once it's released out into the wild. So that's scary.
I think it's going to go really well, I'll tell you that. I've just realised why the dogs are coming. It's because of this dead kitten that's this thing you were fascinated with. It's stopping the wind making a noise. If you're watching on YouTube, I know people will be wondering what this is, so I should mention it. Okay, let's talk about the publishing journey. So we had Chloe Esposito on the podcast recently, and you and Chloe actually sat side by side in the same school, if you like, the Faber Academy.
Indeed. So we were right with each other from the start. From the first day we walked into the Faber Academy, both with, not that many words of our respective first drafts, to the point where we are today. It's been quite a ride together.
And just tell me about the Faber Academy. How do you get on? Is this just an evening school that anybody can wander up to as an application process, an audition process?
There is indeed an application process. So I think in my case, I wrote in to basically explain the nature of my writing. Just a cover letter, a simple cover letter, explaining why you want to be on the course. I think that's what I did. And I think all these applications are read carefully by someone at the Faber Academy, who normally they admit about 15 students for each cohort, because I think 15 is a good number for a writing course. So that's how I got into the program. So it's a sort of a very carefully vetted application process, I believe.
And in terms of the high concept of your book, did that change at all during the course, or was that set at the beginning?
That high concept idea actually came to me a couple of months before I went on the course. So it didn't really change. I stuck to that. And it really was the course which helped me build up this concept. And concepts really are nothing without the small details which make them come alive. And that's what I thought the course was immensely valuable for. With the help of my friends on the course, my fellow classmates, I was able to fill in all the smaller details which collectively make up this high concept world.
Yeah, people don't, when you read books, you don't always realise that is how they work. You can't just have all the detail, that would be boring, and you can't just have a big concept, but telling the story, telling the big concept through the small detail and vice versa is the trick, and that's why writing's difficult.
Absolutely. And I think the most important of them all is character development. Without, characters the reader can believe in, a story is nothing. So I owe everything to my course mates for actually helping me flesh out my characters. I'm grateful to them for telling me, things that, are not consistent, especially, as far as a specific character is concerned. So that matters. And also, in terms of giving characters motivations, in terms of actually giving them, a sense of journey throughout the book, you really need consistent feedback from people telling you whether something is working or not. So I would say that the character development is paramount to any high concept book, and we need support in this regard. We need our friends, classmates to tell us whether things are working or not.
We do have a helicopter. It might be the paparazzi for you, I don't know, floating about. I hope people can hear that, so just mention it. You say that we need that, and you're right, we do need that, but not everyone can take it, right? I mean, that's a reasonably... you've got to feel fairly vulnerable in that environment, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember my first presentation to the group where we each had to send in 5,000 words of our respective manuscripts. And I was on tenterhooks because I had no idea how people would react to it. It really takes a lot to put your work out there and to be open and to be, criticized, commented upon by others. But on hindsight, I realized that this was a very valuable experience because you slowly develop a thick skin, which is what you really need as a writer. So facing a group of 15 people, really helped me to understand that, when you scale that up to, the wider world, when your book goes out in the wider world and people do react differently to the same book. So it really helps you build a thick skin, and also to understand how to receive feedback. It was a realization which struck me halfway throughout the course that when two people point out that something is not working, it usually means it isn't working, and that's something that should be fixed. So I learned how to see sort of points of convergence in feedback, and that's usually the most valuable because when two people say the same thing, it usually means that that thing, is something, very important. Either it's not working or it is. So learning to find these points of convergence is very important for me throughout the course.
And so when you've worked through with your colleagues on this course, you've been given guidance, you developed your book, at what point does that become a deal with an editor?
Oh, it's a very, very long process, to actually getting a deal because, of course, after you finish the course, the next step would be to find an agent for your work. And then, the agent has to find publishers for it. So that's altogether a different ball game from actually just being on a writing course.
So just being on the Faber Academy does not automatically put you, although it must put you in a fairly good position to get an agent.
Well, we did read our works out at the end of the course, about 200 words of our respective manuscripts.
Well, that's not many, is it? 200?
But the audience was great. We had publishers in the audience, we had agents in the audience. So I think it really helps to get your work up there. And the exposure we got through the anthology at the end of the course, which was sent around to all the agencies in London, I think did help get, all of us lots of interest in what we were writing, each of us on the course.
And so what was your journey like from that point? How quickly did things happen?
It happened really, really quickly. And I was really lucky because I tried very hard to put my work out there. And I had a lot of interest from agents, but at that point I didn't really have a full manuscript yet. So I enrolled on a second course at the Faber Academy. It was how to edit your novel, and that lasted 3 months. So I told all the agents who were interested in my book that I really wanted to concentrate on editing it, getting it to the best possible state before sending it out, and everyone was very supportive of this. Although on the last day of the course, I did get an email from an agent saying, "Are you done? Where is your manuscript?" So I was put on the spot, and I said that I'll send it out in 3 weeks from now. And from that point, I was committed to sending it out in 3 weeks because I had said so. I would do it. So 3 weeks later, the last week before I sent the book out, I actually checked into a hotel near London City Airport just to concentrate on writing, just to make sure that the work I sent out would be the best possible I could do at that time. And I checked out of the hotel at around noon. I was still in the lobby I was really nervous to send my work out, although I said I would do it. And around 5 o'clock, I knew I wouldn't be able to go home and face my fiance, who would probably ask, have you sent your work out yet? I didn't want to say no. So I sent it out around 5 o'clock in the afternoon that day. And I fully thought no one would get back to me for 6 weeks, because everyone, would probably need 4 to 6 weeks to digest your submission. But to my great surprise, the next day at around noon, my dream agent, Johnny Gallo, actually got back to me saying he'd read half of it and would like to meet. And I nearly fell off my chair.
Wow.
So we did meet shortly after, and he gave me about 4 weeks to edit the manuscript. And he really wanted me to develop the love side of the story. How do you love someone if you only remember yesterday? And 3 weeks into the editing process, he sort of got in touch saying, could I have your manuscript the next day? And then I just sent it to him the next day, and I didn't sleep that night. And Johnny sent the manuscript out to publishers on both sides of the Atlantic the next working day. And from that point on, it was just pretty crazy, because everyone who received the manuscript who liked it, they got in touch, all the editors. And I spent days just fielding calls on the phone from editors who were interested in the work, and it was a bit odd, really, to have something on your computer, one day, and then 2 days later people are reading and responding to it. So really exciting.
But I'm guessing you were hearing good things, the reason they were contacting you. I mean, That must have been a great feeling.
Oh, absolutely, because all the editors I talked to, they were very excited about how this manuscript could be improved, how we could work on it together as teams, how we could edit it further. So they gave me a lot of editorial suggestions during these chats, and I found it so useful when I was actually re-editing the manuscript later.
Was there no part of you thought, I've done a lot of work on this, I like it as it is, or I'm close to it, and feeling a little bit bristled by people saying I can envisage changes and more work?
I actually must have done about 14 rounds of edits on this book, if not more. And I must confess that I got to a point at the very end where, you realize that you have to let this manuscript go. But that was the final edit. But the different stages of editing were actually really, really exciting, because everyone's responding to it, really eager to help improve the manuscript. So when you take all of that in you actually know that you're aiming for a good product at the end. So that's what keeps you going through multiple editing phases. That's what kept me going.
And then at some point you accepted some offers.
Oh yes, so the book went to auction. And it was...
I'm guessing that's a good thing, right, an auction, rather than you having one person giving you one offer and you thinking, shall I take it or negotiate? Going to auction sounds like a good thing.
It was a good thing, because it's really a sort of very odd situation again, because it's not something you would expect when your book goes out on submission. And I remember waiting by my phone for updates from my agent Johnny, and sort of collapsing next to it in disbelief when he told me the result of the auction. And the pitch which I received from Headline, which is now my UK publisher, it really impressed me the most, because they told me how much they liked the manuscript, how they could possibly improve it. So I couldn't have been more delighted when they eventually won the auction in the UK.
Well, we're delighted as well that Headline won, because we've had Alex from Headline on the podcast in the past. That brings it back full circle to us. He was one of our early guests, and he's a great believer in books. He loves books of all sorts of genres, and so if he likes the book, I mean, I like the book as well, so it's a good book, there's no question about that. And how exciting for you then? So Headline in the UK, and the States?
Little Brown.
Okay.
So I'm with the Mulholland imprint of Little Brown. So they specialise in books which keep people turning the pages. So it's a good place to be. I'm really looked after very well there.
And a lot of the people listening to this podcast are self-publishers. Some are trad and some have a bit of both, a foot in both camps. And they will, see the different size of the different types of deals. But the type of deal, the situation you've got in is probably the very best in terms of the trad side of things, i.e. people fighting over the book in terms of an offer at the beginning. So you haven't gone in I'm guessing, with a very low start and think, well, maybe I'll make money down the line. You've had a really good start. It's probably unusual. You're a bit of an outlier, I think. Not everyone with their first deal is going to be going down to, the car showroom, but it sounds like you've done really well with the first one.
Well, I just feel incredibly lucky, to be in this position, to work with publishers who are really excited about this project. It's utterly wonderful.
Well, it's not just luck, is it? It's a great book. And you've been doing a bit of thinking about this journey, and I know you've been asked to do some chats to writers who are looking to get published. Are there some key takeaways that you would be happy to give out to people, things that they should be focused on if they want to try and get a deal?
Oh, absolutely. Few things I can think off the top of my head is really you have to be determined. It takes a lot of grit to finish a book. It also takes a lot of grit to find a publisher for it. And it takes a lot of luck, but with some determination, in fact, with lots of determination, it's possible to swing the odds in your favor. And I think the next thing here is, to apply an equal amount of creativity to the submission process as you would to the writing of your manuscript. And off the top of my head, an example, so most editors speak a lot at literary festivals, at events. It really helps to actually go out there and meet people, talk to agents in person. It's very easy to reject a manuscript without a face attached to it. And it really helps for people to put a face to a piece of work. So I think that's important. Apart from that, I would say that sweat the small stuff actually when it comes to submission. I took the process very, very seriously. My cover letter, my synopsis, my first 3 chapters. I really wanted to make sure that I got all the words right, to the point where I wouldn't want to change a single word, because this matters. An agent will only sort of look at the manuscript, sort of once. A publisher would only look at it once. So you basically have one chance, and you don't want to lose that chance just because, of a small detail that, isn't quite right. And apart from that, I would strongly suggest, attending events, going to festivals, literary festivals, writing-related events, do writing courses. Because again, it sort of goes back to putting yourself out there, your work out there. So in my case, I entered lots of writing competitions in the sort of final 6 months before my book was ready for submission. And I was lucky to be selected for this competition called Friday Night Live at the York Festival of Writing. So it was an opportunity for me to read my work out to a room full of people, about 200 people, I would reckon. There were agents present. So putting yourself out there really, really helps. So people are aware of what you're doing as a writer and hopefully will respond well to it. And in addition to that, I would say that this whole journey, it's something you can actually work hard and just tip the odds in your favor. And really, I took it like a military operation. I kept a giant Excel file in which I would just feed in data I had harvested about agents, publishers, scouts, and really sort of tried to, do it in a very systematic and methodical way. That's my journey, and I think it may be something that can work for other people too.
That's amazing. Felicia, thank you for sharing that as well. I think that's going to be very useful for people, and particularly interested in the advice about putting yourself out there, meeting people, putting a face to it, because actually not all writers are comfortable. In fact, one of the reasons some people are writers is because they sort of sit in the house and write and they don't have to face people so much. You're obviously comfortable with that side of things, or is this something you had to overcome and really sort of push yourself into being somebody people would remember?
Well, I was nodding away when saying it, because there are days where, you want to be in your own, pleasant little writerly cave, and you want this creative sort of like process to flow, and that's the moments, where you want to retreat from the outer world. But I've also learned that there are moments where you have to embrace the outer world, and it's really finding a balance between the two. And I had previous background as a university lecturer, having to talk to large audiences, giving lectures to lots of students. So that I think helps in terms of interacting with people. But really it's about finding a balance between the two. It's not easy, so I know how difficult it can be, to put yourself out there, but it's definitely worth a shot. I guarantee you, it's very important. The act of writing is merely a smaller picture of the bigger picture of being a writer.
Final question, any film interest at the moment? Because for me, reading this book, I'm thinking this is a film.
Oh yes, certainly. My agent has been receiving offers, and I had a really exciting chat with a Hollywood director recently. So we were on the verge of something really exciting, so I'm very excited to sort of eventually share this news with our world.
Okay, so we'll watch this space on that one. Felicia, congratulations on the book. Yesterday's a fabulous book. I think a lot of people hopefully will be reading after listening to the podcast. Intriguing idea, brilliantly written, and now I've heard you talking about it, no surprise about the enjoyment you get from reading it, because I can hear the work that's gone into it. I mean, you have worked incredibly hard on this, and well done. You've got some just rewards.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be on this podcast. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, remarkable. Talking to Felicia to hear how the genesis of this book was she was, as she explained in the interview, on the way to a dance. She's a competitive dancer at Cambridge University with her boyfriend, now her fiance, and she just had this random idea: what would the world be like if we could only remember yesterday? And she then constructed this book around it. And I tell you, my wife made a good point about the book, and I think I said this to Felicia in the interview. Is that my wife felt it was a romance book, effectively, a bit like Time Traveler's Wife. I suppose there's a context to it, but actually it's a bit of an old-fashioned romance. I actually felt it was an old-fashioned whodunit, because I'm unromantic. Obviously, didn't notice the romance aspect of it, but it's an intriguing concept, which is high concept, very much sought after by people today, and eminently filmable, I would say as well.
Absolutely. And just thinking about the that launch party, so was the intention that you'd all drink so much that you couldn't remember yesterday?
There was a theme to the party, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and with her and Chloe, they've both been extremely fortunate. Obviously, they've written good books, but to get into the position that they're in with a lot of attention on both of those books, from the mainstream media, both been on TV, I think, and film interest in both of them, strong film interest. It's quite unusual. I'd say the odds of two of those authors coming out of the same class is reasonably slim, even though I understand the hit rate for the Faber Academy is pretty good. So they often land deals, but these are unusual deals in that they both had lots of zeros after them. So good for her. She's a really lovely person and a very talented writer.
Yeah, I mean, we do talk to lots of people all the time who are trying to build their careers up and working very hard on list building. And every now and again, it's nice to talk to somebody who just sits back and there's a bidding war. But I can tell you, and you heard me say to Felicia in the interview, she is a workaholic. I don't really like the expression workaholic. She's incredibly diligent. She thinks a lot about what she does, and she is unrelenting at making it happen and making things happen for herself. So this is not an overnight success or an accident. She deserves it. I'd recommend the book, I really do, Felicia Yap, yesterday. So I want to thank her for coming on. Actually did her a little favour. We recorded some video for her New York agent to use in promoting the book out there, and we are definitely going to keep a close eye on her and Chloe's story, particularly as both those authors could end up with very high-profile Hollywood films in the next few years. I think both of those are filmable, certainly yesterday. I think most people, their eyes will light up at the idea of a high-concept movie that has an intriguing twist to it.
Absolutely. So before we move on, we should mention Patreon.
Yes.
So we're very flattered that we've got so many Patreon supporters now. It does make a bit of a dent in fact, quite a big dent now in the expenses of putting the podcast out. So we're very grateful for those who are following us on Patreon and supporting us. And the link, I'm just looking at John. It's
patreon.com/SPF Podcast.
There we go. So professional.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to support us, that's where you need to go, and you can support us, but in a very small amount. But it all adds up, and it's very helpful to us, and we really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for those who've taken part. It's been a couple of weeks since we've allocated any mugs, so I'm going to choose 4 people this week to receive mugs. If you're a Patreon supporter and you haven't got a mug already, look out. You may be getting an email from Lucy. What was that?
That's me moving the mug. And,
Oh, I see.
your shed's falling down.
What? I haven't paid for it yet. Yes, we do have mugs here. I've got one here. You've got one there. This is, I think, the one I've got is the North American mug, and
Yes.
the one you've got is the UK or Europe mug.
Yes.
It's a bit like PAL and NTSC, isn't it? There's got to be a different format. Everything happens differently between Europe and
God,
America.
you're a geek.
Such a geek. Does anyone remember NTSC? Does that still exist? That's John Dyer's nodding. I'm not sure what that's an indication of. Thank you very much indeed to our guest this week, Felicia Yap. Thank you to you, our dear listener. We look forward to speaking to you again next week. Until then, have a great week writing and a great week selling.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.